Hello, I'm Evan Nolan, the president and co-founder of the United States Athletics Hall of Fame, here with another returning nominee for the class of 2024. The pride of Brockton, Massachusetts, Rocco Francis Marciano, much better known to all of us as Rocky Marciano, is, by record anyway, the most successful heavyweight fighter ever. Born in Brockton on September 1st, 1923, Rocky is one of 6 children born to Italian immigrants, Pierino Marciano and Pasqualina Picciuto. I just love those old school Italian names. When Rocky was 18 months old, he actually almost died of a severe case of pneumonia, but he recovered and started working out. He worked out in homemade weightlifting equipment, which included a mail bag that he had stuffed to double as a heavy bag for boxing practice. Now, Marciano would attend Brockton High School, where he played both baseball and football, although he got kicked off the baseball team because he was also playing on a church league and he was allowed to play both. He'd actually drop out of Brockton High after 10th grade and start finding work as a shoot man for the Brockton Ice and Coal Company, also working as a shoemaker, a railroad layer, and a ditch digger. He'd be drafted in the U.S. Army during World War II and be stationed in Swansea, Wales, helping ferry supplies across the English Channel to Normandy. He finished his military service in 1946. But while still in the services, he represented the Army at the 1946 Amateur Armed Forces Boxing Tournament and won it. Once back in civilian life, he would start his boxing career going 8-4 as an amateur. He'd have his first professional fight in March of 1947, knocking out Lee Epperson in 3 rounds. He then traveled to North Carolina to try out for the Fayetteville Cubs, the Cubs minor league affiliate, and would last 3 weeks of spring training for them before getting cut. He then returned to Brockton to take up boxing full-time. Now, he temporarily returned to the amateur ranks, which is a little bit unusual, competing in the 1948 Golden Gloves All-East Tournament and losing controversially in the championship round. He then competed in the AAU Olympic tryouts at Boston Garden in 1948, knocking out George McGinnis in what would be his last amateur match. He'd start boxing professionally full-time afterwards. And his first match as a full-time professional would be later that year in a knockout of Harry Bilazarian. In fact, his first 16 fights would all have knockouts as a professional. All of them were within 5 rounds, and 9 of the 16 didn't even get out of the first round. During this time, an announcer in Providence couldn't properly pronounce Marciano, and so Rocky changed the more pronounceable Marciano for the rest of his career. Now, his 17th fight against Don Mogard was the first to go the full 10 rounds, but Marciano would still win by unanimous decision. The first named fighter that he would face would be Phil Moscato, who Marciano would knock out in the 5th round. 3 weeks later, he'd come up against a young hotshot prospect named Carmine Vingo, who came in at 16-1. Marciano would knock him out in the 6th round, but Vingo would lose consciousness, was given only a 50-50 chance to live, and actually had his last rites administered after the match. Fortunately, he would recover, and he and Marciano actually became friends later in life, but Vingo would retire from boxing. At that point, Marciano was 25-0. Now, closest Marciano would come to losing his career would be his next fight against a undefeated, and by undefeated, he was 37-0, Roland LaStarza at Madison Square Garden. He'd win by referee decision after the judges had it 5-4 Marciano, 4-5 LaStarza, and a 5-5 draw. His first televised fight would be on July 12, 1951, knocking out heavyweight title contender Rex Lane in 6 rounds. Later that year, he'd fight a past his prime but still favored Joe Louis, an inaugural inductee in the United States Athletics Hall of Fame, knocking the Brom Bomber out in the 8th round in what turned out to be the final fight of Joe Louis's career. That brought Marciano to 38-0. Now, Marciano would finally get his title shot in September 1952 at the age of 29 against Jersey Joe Walcott. Walcott actually knocked Marciano down in the 1st round and was leading on points when Marciano landed a vicious right hook in the 13th round that dropped Walcott to his knees with his arm draped over the ropes. Walcott remained in that position long after being counted out, and Marciano was declared heavyweight champion. He'd fight Walcott in a rematch in March of 1953, this time knocking out the former champion in just 2.5 minutes into round 1, in what was the last fight of Walcott's career. He defended his title against LaStarza, the previous 37-0 guy he'd beaten, knocking him out in the 11th round. He'd then follow up with 2 fights against former heavyweight champion Ezzard Charles, who he would defeat by unanimous decision, which would make Charles the only fighter to ever last 15 rounds against Marciano, and then an 8th round knockout. He'd also fight against British and European champion Don Cockle, who he knocked out in the 9th round, and had one final bout against a top heavyweight contender Archie Moore, who he knocked out in the 9th round as well. Marciano would retire after that fight at the age of 32, after 6 successful defenses of his title, having never lost as a professional fighter, and knocking out 87.8% of his opponents en route to a career record of 49-0. He was named Ring Magazine's Fighter of the Year 3 times. He's a member of both the World and International Boxing Halls of Fame. Marciano would tragically die in a plane crash in 1969 at just the age of 45, as a legend undefeated. Marciano actually finished 42nd on our ballot last year, so he's in good position to get in to the United States Athletics Hall of Fame in year 2. That's going to be up to you. You can vote for Rocky Marciano or any of our other nominees to the United States Athletics Hall of Fame at www.theusahuf.com. That's the United States Athletics Hall of Fame.com. Vote will continue between now and we close our polls December 1st. So vote as often as you like, as long as it's only once a day. I'll be back soon with another nominee, but until then, take care.